All right, hello everyone. It seems that my video I uploaded for today's lecture for Thursday, April 18th, seems that there's a big error where basically the video stops and freezes, but the audio continues. So feel free to watch that podcast style and listen to it if you would like. But basically, I'm just going to re record that part of the lecture, but I'm going to do this sort of expedited style. Okay, basically, unfortunately, I am already traveling. I'm not at home where I have the video file to re upload it, to fix the error. So my only option, again, is to re record that part of the lecture. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to try to get through it as quick as I can. And I'm going to tell you at the end exactly what I want you to focus on for the exam. Because again, I'm going to breeze right through it. So I want to make sure you know what to focus on. So anyways, picking up where the video froze, basically we were talking about the lactate shuttle. Okay. So kind of already talked about it in the video. But we know that the lactate shuttle basically is the pumping of lactate and essentially hydrogen too, but the pumping of lactate around the body. So the lactate shuttle mechanism, basically depicted here, I don't really remember how deep I went into this in the video before it froze, but just kind of going through the steps here. What are we looking at? Okay, so we're looking at a muscle with our fast twitch and slow twitch fibers. We know that our fast twitch, fast glycolytic fibers are going to be the ones producing the lactate. So the fast glycolytic fibers produce lactate and hydrogen. The lactate and hydrogen exit the cell via that co-transport mechanism up here. And then the lactate will travel around the body and be pumped to other tissues that can use it, such as the slow oxidative fibers and so on. Okay, that is known as the lactate shuttle. We also know that the lactate can be pumped to the liver and be converted back to glucose and be used as a fuel source. This is called the Cori cycle. So lactate produced by skeletal muscle is transported to the liver. So the lactate shuttle will pump it to the liver. The liver will then convert that lactate to glucose or glycogen. That's that process of gluconeogenesis, new glucose, the production of new glucose. That helps us maintain our carbohydrate reserves. Remember, our body does not like to be low carbohydrate, low glucose. So again, this Cori cycle helps us sort of as a fail-safe to make sure that we never fully run out of glucose or, it just helps us maintain it, okay? So then again, that glucose that's produced through that process of gluconeogenesis in the liver, this is the Cori cycle, that glucose is then transported back to the muscle and we can use it again for fuel. So that is being shown right here. So again, what are those steps? I might ask you this on the exam. So we know that the muscle produces lactate and hydrogen. The lactate and hydrogen are pumped out of the cell from that through that co-transport mechanism. The lactate will then be transported through the bloodstream. In this case, we're talking about the Cori cycle. So the lactate will be transported to the liver. The liver will then convert that lactate back to glucose through the Cori cycle. The glucose can then be transported back to the working muscle again to be used as fuel. Okay. So definitely know that. But again, I'll come back and let you know exactly what I want you to know. We've already talked about that too, so we don't have to get too much into it. All right, what do I want you to know for this slide? So the ingestion of sodium buffers and human performance. Okay, so remember, we're talking, what is a buffer? A buffer is something that resists changes in pH. Bicarbonate is one of the major buffers that we've been talking about. We know that bicarbonate helps us resist those changes in acidity with exercise when we're producing a lot of that hydrogen. So bicarbonate, sodium bicarbonate, is actually baking soda. So you can ingest these buffers, and basically this slide is saying, does it have an effect? Like what happens when we actually ingest these buffers? So for the most part, it's not really a good sort of performance enhancing method, it doesn't really have much of an effect. It might have some of an effect, but it's not really great, and there's a lot of side effects, basically. So some studies show that, yes, it improves performance. Other studies show no improvement in performance. Okay, so this one is, we're talking about sodium buffers here. Okay, so sodium bicarbonate is literally baking soda. Okay, so like we're talking about ingesting baking soda or other things similar to that. So the theory is if you ingest more bicarbonate, more, buffer, then you're putting that into your bloodstream and you're able to buffer acidity better. So that's sort of the the theory behind using this as a performance enhancing drug. Not drug, but method, whatever. So anyways, again, some studies show that you can have sort of an effect. So it can increase time to exhaustion during high intensity exercise. So again, why? Because that's when we're going to be needing the buffering capacity, when we're really pushing our limits, we're really challenging our pH. But like I said, there's quite a lot of side effects, especially nausea, vomiting, a lot of GI things. Large doses can cause alkalosis, so too far back in the other direction. Right? Because obviously the reason you're trying to ingest buffers is to help deal with acidity and reduce acidity. But if you were to take too much, then you can kind of go too far back the other way, right? And then also, of course, whatever sport you're competing in or whatever it is, you have to make sure that it's not banned, right? Because technically, certain organizations can consider this, not what's the right word? Not able to be used. Not illegal, that's not the right word. Whatever, you know what I'm saying. It might be banned. So anyways, that's kind of the bottom line. It's okay. Could you use it? Yes. Is it good? Probably not. And you're probably going to have side effects. So kind of one of the not so great sort of supplements or whatever to take. Okay. Muscle fibers, okay? So the influence of muscle fiber type in exercise training on intracellular buffering capacity. So we've got our type 1 fibers, our type 2 fibers, slow twitch, fast twitch, okay? So compared to slow type 1 muscle fibers, type 2 fast twitch muscle fibers have a greater buffering capacity. Why? Because they're the ones that are producing the lactic acid, right? The glycolytic fibers are the ones producing the lactic acid because they're doing glycolysis. They're glycolytic. Slow twitch fibers or type 1 fibers are oxidative. They're not really dealing with anaerobic metabolism producing lactate, so they don't need as much of a buffering capacity. So when we ask why do they have these differences, literally simply put, because it's the one muscle fiber that's producing the lactate. So it's the fiber that needs the buffering capacity. So with exercise training, specifically high-intensity exercise training, you can improve your muscle buffering capacity, whether you're trained, untrained, due to increases in both carnosine and hydrogen ion transporters. Okay, so definitely know that. What am I saying here? Okay, so yes, we can improve our buffering capacity. Here's two reasons: hydrogen ion transporters and carnosine transporters. So if I go back here, remember, in order to resist these changes in pH, the muscle has to buffer the hydrogen. One of the ways it gets rid of the hydrogen is by pumping it out. So if you enhance this sort of pumping ability, you're enhancing buffering ability. So when we say that training improves buffering capacity, we're improving these transporters, okay? So the hydrogen ion transporters that pump the hydrogen out, and also carnosine transporters, which we haven't really talked about, but it's all involved in the mix. You don't really have to know any more than what is highlighted pretty much. Okay, so this slide is pretty straightforward. Okay, so we've already seen this reaction here, right? This is our bicarbonate reaction. We know when CO2 levels go up, we're going to breathe out to get rid of it. Okay, so we've got ventilation here. Okay, so if we increase ventilation, this reaction is moving to the left. If we decrease ventilation, this reaction is moving to the right. Okay, so that's what we're looking at here. So respiratory control of acid-base balance involves the regulation of blood partial pressure of carbon dioxide and thus hydrogen via this reaction. Meaning that when you regulate or blow off more carbon dioxide, you're sort of in proximity regulating hydrogen because of this reaction, okay? But if I were to ask you, respiratory control of acid-base balance involves the control of what? The answer is the partial pressure of carbon dioxide, okay? It's those changes in carbon dioxide that the body can sense that is what drives the ventilation, okay? It's not the hydrogen necessarily. Yes, certain things can sense pH too, but specifically respiratory control of acid-base balance when we're dealing with increasing breathing is directly tied to carbon dioxide levels. Okay, so what do I want you to know from this slide? Okay, this is showing what's happening in an exercising or acidosis condition where our body's trying to deal with acidity. And this is what's happening in an alkalotic condition where our body is trying to essentially bring pH back down again, okay? So if the blood partial pressure of carbon dioxide goes up because of this reaction, because it's connected to hydrogen, pH goes down, right? We're increasing acidity. If we increase our ventilation, the reaction moves to the left and we decrease our carbon dioxide. We start blowing off carbon dioxide. If we blow off carbon dioxide, it will lower hydrogen concentrations and increase pH. Then that will help reverse that initial acidity. On the other hand, if our carbon dioxide levels get too low, our body doesn't like that either. So if that's too low, then because of this reaction, hydrogen levels are also altered. So if carbon dioxide levels are low, hydrogen levels are low, and pH is too high, okay? And then if pH is too high, our body actually decreases ventilation. If we decrease ventilation, this reaction moves to the right. We increase and keep more of the carbon dioxide, and therefore, because of the relationship, we increase hydrogen ion concentration. If we increase hydrogen ion concentration, pH goes down. So again, these are the ways that the body deals with these changes in pH, specifically with respiratory control of acid-base balance. Okay, again, it's respiratory control of acid-base balance involves directly regulating the partial pressure of carbon dioxide. Okay, again, which way is this reaction moving? All right, you guys can go over this slide here. This pretty much just lists out all of the receptors and what stimulates it. So if partial pressure of carbon dioxide is changing, pH changing, all of these sort of things. So make sure to read through these, and then it pretty much says here what happens, okay? Respiratory control of acid-base balance during exercise. Okay, so this is kind of the bigger picture here. All right, so what are all the players sort of doing during exercise? All right, so sort of running through this, okay, this is depicting a feedback mechanism. Okay, so during exercise, okay, well, before I even start that, what are we looking at here? Again, we're looking at all of the players. So we're going to be looking at the receptors that sense changes in carbon dioxide and changes in pH. We're going to look at where it sends that information over to the brain, the respiratory control center. We're going to see, well, what does it do with that information? What does it tell the respiratory muscles to do, either increase or decrease breathing? And how does it have its effect? So during exercise, chemoreceptors in the carotid and aortic bodies, so the carotid is right up here on the way to the brain, the aortic bodies are here coming right off the heart. So the chemoreceptors in the carotid and aortic bodies relay sensory information about any decreases in pH and any increases in carbon dioxide levels. And they relay that information to the respiratory control center, the pontine and medullary respiratory control centers in the brainstem. The respiratory control center then relays motor commands. It tells the respiratory muscles, it tells them what to do. So if we're getting too acidic or carbon dioxide levels are getting too high, they're going to say, hey, we need to increase breathing. So let's get those respiratory muscles going. So then if we increase ventilation, we will then blow off that excess carbon dioxide that we're trying to deal with because of that reaction again. And then everything will be brought back down where it needs to be. We'll lower back carbon dioxide levels, we'll decrease hydrogen levels, and if we decrease hydrogen levels, we bring pH back up. So it says here, what kind of feedback is this? Okay, you guys should know exactly what this is. It is negative feedback. If carbon dioxide or pH is getting straying away from where it needs to be, we're bringing it back into where it needs to be, back into that homeostatic range. And what type of feedback? Again, that is negative, when we're reversing the initial stimulus. So can you name and describe the components of this feedback system? So remember back at the beginning of the class when we said, when we have a feedback mechanism, we've got the sensor, the control center, and the effectors. Okay, so when we're dealing with respiratory control here, can we name the components? So first, what is the stimulus? The stimulus is changes in pH or carbon dioxide levels. The sensor is going to be whatever is able to detect the change in that stimulus. So our sensor in this system is going to be our chemoreceptors. Then they send their information to the control center. The control center is the respiratory control center in the brain, the pontine and medullary respiratory control centers. That control center then sends a message to the effectors to then do whatever they need to do. What are the effectors? The effectors are the respiratory muscles, the ones doing the changing. So then the respiratory control center, based on all of this feedback that told it what to do, will either increase or decrease ventilation to get things back where it needs to be. Again, bringing things back where it needs to be, that's that negative feedback. Okay, these are the respiratory control centers. Again, you can take a look at that. Okay, so the kidneys, all right? So the kidneys regulate acid-base balance at rest or chronic, okay? So we've been talking a lot about bicarbonate, ventilation. Those are things happening during exercise. They still happen in general, but really like our bicarbonate system and all of that, like when it really buffers acidity, that's kind of an exercising condition. So what is happening in just a resting condition, okay? And it's actually our kidneys doing the jobs. So the kidneys do not regulate acid-base balance during exercise. Again, this is a chronic resting condition, things over time, okay? During exercise, we need to buffer the acidity very quickly, right? What do the kidneys do? The way the kidneys are going to regulate acid-base balance is by either peeing out bicarbonate or keeping it back in the body, okay? It regulates bicarbonate levels. That's not something that's happening immediately, right? We're not going and peeing in the middle of exercise. So this is a long-term kind of like, general homeostasis type of thing. So the kidneys regulate it at rest, okay? They do not regulate it during exercise. Again, during exercise, we're dealing with our buffering systems and respiratory compensation, where we're blowing off that CO2. Kidneys do regulate blood bicarbonate concentration. So if pH decreases, we're getting too acidic, the kidneys will decrease the rate of excretion of bicarbonate, meaning that they're going to pee out less, keep more bicarbonate in the blood. If we keep more bicarbonate in the blood, we have more buffer in the blood. If we have more buffer in the blood, then we're able to deal with the acidity. So we're going to help decrease the acidity. If pH goes the other way, we're too alkalotic, then the kidneys increase the rate of bicarbonate excretion. We get rid of the bicarbonate, we pee it out so that there's less in the blood and we can let ourselves bring the pH back down just a little, get just a little acidic back to the normal range at least. Okay, so definitely know that the kidneys regulate it at rest and also how they regulate it. So if pH goes up, if pH goes down, what happens with bicarbonate excretion? Okay, lactic acid production, all right? Regulation of acid-base balance during exercise. So we're still talking about exercise here. So lactic acid production, we know, depends on exercise intensity. Higher the intensity, the more we got to rely on glycolysis and things like that. Exercise duration, the longer the exercise, the more we're going to produce lactic acid. And of course, the quantity of muscle mass. So obviously, the more muscle we use, the more glycolysis we have, the more lactic acid we produce. Okay, pretty straightforward there. Now, when we're looking at pH, okay, we've been talking about how these changes in lactic acid and hydrogen can affect our pH, right? Because that is what pH is affected by. It's affected by hydrogen levels. So when we're talking about pH, we can talk about within the muscle and in the blood. And technically, we've been talking about both because the lactic acid is produced in the muscle and it goes into the blood, and we've been talking about how we sort of handle all of those changes in pH. But we haven't actually talked about what is the difference in pH between the blood environment and the muscle, within the muscle environment. So we've got blood pH and muscle pH. They both are going to decline with increasing exercise intensity, right? The more exercise we do, the more lactic acid we produce. The more acidic we get, the lower the pH goes. But muscle pH declines more dramatically than blood pH. Why? Because that's where the lactic acid is being produced, within the muscle. So lactic acid is produced within the muscle, so there's more there. But also, muscle has a lower buffering capacity than blood, okay? So what do I want you to know here? Know basically these things, what lactic acid production depends on, these 3 bullet points. Also know that muscle pH declines more dramatically than blood pH, and why. So these reasons here. All right, so that's pretty much the same thing shown right here. So both of them decline, but muscle pH declines more than blood pH. I guess I should move this here. Okay, so we get more of a decline again from those reasons. And muscle pH, even at rest, is always lower pH than blood pH. Why? Again, we have higher lactic acid, that's where it's produced, and lower buffering capacity. Okay, I'm not really going to go through this slide. We've pretty much already talked about these things, all right? So during exercise, within the muscle, okay, we've got our intracellular buffers within the muscle. The majority of it is through those intracellular proteins. About 20 to 30% by muscle bicarbonate, and the remaining from intracellular phosphate groups. In the blood, when we're dealing with our extracellular buffers, bicarbonate is our main player here, which is what we've been talking about this whole time, okay? So increases in lactic acid are accompanied by decreases in blood pH and bicarbonate. Basically, what this means is if we look at these little charts here, okay, when lactate levels go up, pH goes down. And what do we do with all of this, acidity? Our bicarbonate comes along and buffers it. So when the bicarbonate comes along and buffers it, bicarbonate levels go down, right? Because it's used up. Pretty straightforward. Our extracellular buffers in the blood during exercise, hemoglobin and plasma proteins are minor, okay? Remember, at rest, hemoglobin is the major buffer. During at least in the blood. At rest, hemoglobin is the major buffer in the blood, but during exercise, bicarbonate is the major buffer in the blood. All right, we've already gone over this chart here, okay? But the lactate, just to sort of go back to this concept here, the lactate or anaerobic threshold coincides with the ventilatory threshold, okay? Why? Because our ventilation needs to kick in to assist the bicarbonate buffering system. When it converts all of that bicarbonate to carbon dioxide, we need to blow it off by increasing ventilation. So right around where we hit the lactate threshold, and it says anaerobic threshold here, but we're talking about the lactate threshold, right around the same time that we hit the lactate threshold, we hit the ventilatory threshold. Again, because It's the ventilation that's kicking in to get rid of that acidity, to get rid of that lactate and acidity. Okay. First line, second line, this is pretty much talking about what kicks in first and what kind of comes after, okay? So our first line is going to be our cellular buffers, some of the blood buffers, and then the second line is going to be the blood buffers. Why is the first line mostly cellular buffers? Because that's where the metabolism is happening, okay? That's where the acidity and all of that stuff is happening. So first line, we've got our cellular buffers, then our blood buffers, some bicarbonate kicks in. Second line, this is when we're really dealing with the acidity now. So now we're dealing with arterial changes in pH. So the second line is going to be blood buffers. Bicarbonate is the main player here. Again, during exercise, bicarbonate is going to be our major buffer. Then we also have respiratory compensation, which is when we have that increase in ventilation to, again, through that reaction, blow off excess CO2 to help lower hydrogen concentration, okay? Now, respiratory compensation is a little bit different than just an increase in ventilation with exercise, okay? Respiratory compensation is pretty much when we're hitting that ventilatory threshold, okay? Because ventilation is still increasing as soon as we start exercise, right? We know that as soon as we start exercising, ventilation is going to start going up. But it goes up in a linear fashion at first, and then eventually, as we increase exercise intensity, we hit the ventilatory threshold that coincides with that lactate threshold, where we get an exponential increase in ventilation. And that is what we call respiratory compensation. When our breathing is really kicking in, trying to blow off all of that excess CO2 that's being produced, again, through our buffering abilities, okay? Again, because we're exercising at those high intensities, our body is producing a lot of lactate, hydrogen, our buffering system is kicking in, which is leading to all of this non-metabolic CO2 production that, again, we have to increase our ventilation to get rid of. Okay, this is the last slide or so here. So lines of defense, this is literally the same exact thing I just said, so you don't have to look at that. Just in a picture form. Okay, so again, our first line of defense here, we've got our cellular buffers, and then our second line of defense is going to be our blood buffers. Some of them overlap, right? We still have bicarbonate within the cell and in the blood. So just keep that in mind when you look at these things, right? Also, our hydrogen ion transporters are considered a cellular buffer, right? Because what is a buffer? It's anything helping us resist changes in pH. If our hydrogen transporters are pumping hydrogen out of the cell, that's considered a buffer. Okay, so we can take a look at this picture here. Again, respiratory compensation is tied to our bicarbonate, and so on. All right, last thing, make sure that you read the article located in the module, Does Muscle pH Affect Performance? It's a very short article. It's like not even a page and a half. So go ahead and give that a read. Now, with that being said, like I said, I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. And I'm going to, you know what? I can't do that now that I think of it. I'm going to... Because I'm screwing myself over here. All right, I'm going to stop the video here, and I'm just going to give you a little bullet point list of what I want you to know, okay? Because basically what I was going to do is I was going to read through the PowerPoint, and I have the exam questions on there. I was going to tell you exactly what I want you to know, but you can see my screen. So I'm just going to make that in a bullet point. Anyways, I apologize for the video getting messed up. It's pretty unfortunate because I spent a lot of time trying to get that set up to make sure that everything was smooth. But I'm here now, so good luck on your exam. Let me know if you have any questions, and hopefully this video is not too long.